But it doesn't matter what science does, they'll never be able to actually create anything from nothing. They can't do it. No matter how hard they try, whatever laboratory, however sophisticated, they can do everything that they want to do. They can't create one atom of anything from nothing. And yet their theory states that everything in the known universe came from nothing, all by accident. And nobody caused it, and there is no reason behind it. And they can't do it with all the equipment and all the sophistication that they have. They can't do it. Now, does it take faith to believe that God did it? Yes, it does. And I freely admit that. The difference is, I admit mine is faith. They call theirs science. And the reality is theirs takes more faith than mine does. Because they really have no explanation. To say that an intelligent designer designed and created is not unintelligent, and it is not as far-fetched as everything creating itself for no reason from nothing.
Randomly.
Yeah, by accident. And so he says they're willingly ignorant. You have to literally look at the evidence like this, because you cannot really look at it objectively and come to the conclusion that it all happened by accident. You have to make some wild assumptions. And he says, so they're willingly ignorant that by the Word of God the heavens were of old. They're willingly ignorant of the fact that God spoke it by the Word of God. The heavens came into existence. They're willingly ignorant of that fact. And the earth standing out of the water and in the water. And of course, if you read in Genesis chapter 1, you'll see that God created the earth, and then the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and He caused there to be a firmament that divided the waters that were below from the waters that were above. Some people think that the firmament meant the dry land, but then you get over to chapter 2 and it talks about the fact that the birds flew in the firmament of heaven, and so you realize it's not the dirt. Birds can't fly through the dirt, but they fly in heaven, and that there was water on the earth and that there was water above the atmosphere of the earth, which is where the birds fly. And that the original creation had some sort of canopy, whether it was vapor or ice or whatever, of water above the earth. And he says the word standing out of the water and in the water, whereby that water that was under and above the earth, the world that then was being overflowed with water perished. They will be willingly ignorant of these things. It's very pointed and it's very specific. In the last days, there's going to be scoffers that are going to be willingly ignorant of the creation and of the fact that God judged the creation through a global, worldwide flood. There's many even Christian scholars that will tell you that, well, really the flood of Noah was just a local event. It only flooded the valley where Noah lived.
They always called it like a boat, and calling it a boat would have been an understatement.
Exactly. And not to be critical, but to be critical of those that say that. How dumb would it be for God to instruct Noah to build an ark to save the animals that were on the earth when all God planned to flood was the valley that Noah lived in? Wouldn't it have just been easier to tell Noah to move? Okay, not to mention, and not everybody knows this, but water does seek its own level. And the Bible says that the water covered the highest mountain 15 cubits upward. Well, you can't just pile it up in one spot to cover this mountain. It's going to spread out. There again, It's not open for interpretation. It's given as a very matter-of-fact description in Genesis chapter 6, 7, and 8 of what happened. God flooded the entire world with water. And of course, many people say, well, where did it go? Well, if you've been to the beach recently, you'll notice that the oceans are enormous. Okay? And what you see is just the top. There's a lot underneath that. Okay? You can literally look at the globe from one spot in the Pacific Ocean and not see anything but water. There is a tremendous amount of water. In fact, if you raise the ocean basins and flatten down the land on Earth, you could cover the entire globe with the water that's on the surface now, 12,000 feet deep. There's plenty of water out there to flood the whole world. Now, I think after the flood, and geology backs this up, and we won't have time to cover all of this, but geology backs it up. After the flood, more than likely, the fountains of the deep, when they broke open and gushed water out from under the crust of the earth, those basins collapsed, becoming the now deeper ocean basins. And those deeper ocean basins, as far as, and with the crust of the earth heaving and moving, probably pushed up some of the mountain ranges and some of the land, and allowed all of the water that covered the surface of the earth during the flood to run into what were much, much deeper ocean basins once the floor collapsed where the water under the surface of the earth was. And now all of the water is contained in the oceans. It makes perfect sense. Why? Because at the end of the flood, Noah steps off the boat. God put a rainbow in the sky, and what did he tell Noah? I promise you, I will never destroy the earth by water again. And the earth in its current state, because now all of the water that there is on the surface of the earth cannot be flooded again. You cannot flood the earth again, because the ocean basins are deep enough. The only water that winds up on land has to come from where? And the sky gets it from, the water cycle. Okay? So you cannot, in other words, what I'm saying is you cannot rain enough to flood the earth, because when it rains on the land, where does it eventually run into? The creeks and the rivers, and where do those run into? The ocean. It's a complete cycle. So when God wasn't just speaking something that he was ignorant of, God understood completely when he told Noah, I'll never flood the earth again. He had already put into place the mechanism that would make it physically impossible. Before the flood, with the canopy of water above the earth and the water underneath the crust of the earth in its current state as God created it, it was possible to flood the earth. Now, I understand God did it miraculously, yes, but it was physically possible as well, and we see the evidence of that today. And here's where we get to the point that we're trying to make here, where he says they're willingly ignorant of the creation and the flood. Okay? He says that the world that was then being overflowed with water perished. They choose to be willingly ignorant of this. And I've put together a stack of a few proofs. Now look, y'all know me, we could spend years on this, okay? But we're just going to go with a few. You should look into it yourself. It's fun. I like the study of this stuff, but some people don't. And so for the sake of those that don't, I'll move on. But when you go to school, the first thing they're going to tell you about when it comes to geology and the age of the earth is going to be the geologic column. They're going to show you in a textbook where all of these subsequent layers of sedimentation and sedimentary rock are different ages. And of course you see the chart on the right there refers to the rock in Grand Canyon, and you'll notice that one column right there is age in millions of years. Okay? And the layers of thickness in feet to the far right. And so if you look, it starts from about 1100, which would be 1.1 to 1.2 billion there at the very bottom. And as you go up through the layers, you get to the top that's only about 270 million years old, as they call it. Okay? So by their geologic column, They tell you that all of these layers of rock and sedimentation take place extremely slowly over time. Oh, that sounds familiar. 2 Peter chapter 3, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation, right? So all of the layers are millions of years old, and it takes millions of years to build all of these layers up. My question is, where do they come from? If the layer on the bottom is 100 million years old and the layer on top is today, where did the layer on top come from?
Sorry, can I take a closer look? I'm getting a whiplash.
Yeah, go ahead. Because if you took the material from the surface of the earth, you couldn't superimpose it over what's already there and it'd be older. But regardless, they say that all the layers are millions of years old, and they took millions of years to lay down.
Yes, of course. Something happened that kind of
Right.
it all around.
The creationist, the biblical scholar, looks at this and says, no. These are all layers of sedimentary rock. Sedimentary means it was put down and laid down by water. Okay? All of the globe, all of the land on the entire face of the earth is covered by sedimentary rock, laid down by water. With the few exceptions of the really high, jagged, rough mountains where it is actual bedrock, bedrock exposed. For instance, even Stone Mountain is bedrock exposed. Which means that all of the sediment was either washed off of it during some event, or it was uplifted in some type of seismic event. But most of the planet has sedimentary rock layers that range anywhere from a few feet to thousands and thousands and thousands of feet. Now, how did thousands and thousands and thousands of feet of sedimentary rock get laid down in places that are nowhere close to the water today? Well, the evolutionist says, well, it just took millions of years. See, if you sprinkle the magic ingredient of time into it, it starts to sound possible to our brain. The reality is you can give it as much time as you want to. It's not possible.
What's the great unconformity?
It's the uplift in the bottom layers of the rock in the Grand Canyon where they're bent and superimposed over one over the other. They call it the great unconformity because it doesn't line up with their systematic laying down of the chart. So they say it must have been some type of problem that created that. Yeah.
I see that they named the bottom layer after a Hindu god.
Yeah. Now, they won't tell you in the textbooks, and this is important. They won't tell you in the textbooks that these layers see how neat that looks? See how organized that looks? And see how that would make perfect sense in most young people's mind. Oh, well, it must be like that everywhere, and it's just perfectly laid down in these certain layers. Number one, do you know the only place that the full geologic column occurs in the entire world? There's only one place. In the textbook. There is no place in the world where all of the layers that they claim there to be occur in any one place. Many places in the world, the layers are out of order. The layers are opposite. There's huge chunks of it that are on top of the other chunk that's supposedly older over here, but now it's underneath the one that's older over here. It's almost like the whole world was covered with water and sloshed around for a year. And all of the massive amounts of sediment that filled in would have filled in differently in this place and that place based on what was washing and what was moving around at the time. It's almost like that's what would have happened. But see, they put it in a nice picture like that and tell you that these are different millions of years old. Most people just don't know what else to do but believe it. They think it's science. They think it's fixed. This is how it is. See, the problem is there's lots of proofs that tell me that these layers are not millions of years old. One of the best and most primary one is what they call polystrate fossils. Now, they don't know how to explain them, so they usually don't put the pictures in the textbook. But remember, those rock layers are millions of years old each. Here's petrified trees running through what is supposed to be millions of years of layers. How long does a tree, when it dies, stand in your yard? A few years? Maybe 20 years, if it's the right condition. You mean that tree stood there for 100 million years while all of those layers of sediment built up around it? I don't think so.
Yeah, it would have been decomposed.
Yeah, and there's many more. I couldn't find a picture of it, but in Lompoc, California, they mine diatomaceous earth. Now, diatoms are little bitty microscopic creatures that are found in the ocean, and they build up in layers on the ocean floor pretty much around the world. If you've seen it, a lot of people use it for pest control. It's good for fertilizer. It's called diatomaceous earth. The diatoms are actually so small, it's a fine white powder. They're so small that you can use it as an insect killer because insects breathe through sphericals in their skin, and the little fine particles of dust are small enough to clog up the sphericals in their skin and they suffocate to death. That's how it kills bugs. They mine diatomaceous earth in Lompoc, California that is hundreds of feet thick, but only in that valley. Now, it's nowhere else that thick, so it's almost like during a major flood event, the waters of the ocean sloshed around and a huge volume of this diatomaceous earth got deposited there. The evolutionist looks at hundreds and hundreds of feet of diatomaceous earth and says, well, diatoms only build up at the bottom of the ocean by the rate of about an inch every 10,000 years. And we're mining hundreds and hundreds of feet of it, so it must be that the earth is millions of years old, because that's the only way you could get 100 and something feet of diatomaceous earth, right? Makes sense. Until they found a huge 60-foot long baleen whale fossil, fully preserved, standing on its nose up through the layers of diatomaceous earth. Now, there's only two options. Either the whale stood there balanced on his nose for millions of years while the diatomaceous earth built up around him, or it was all deposited there by a cataclysmic event that placed it in some type of flood environment where the layers segregated and separated out in that area. There's only two explanations. Now, how long does a whale last in the bottom of the ocean not covered by anything? It doesn't. All of the fossils that they find around the world, most are found in what are called fossil graveyards. Huge, huge collections of fossils. And they're just stacked and piled and twisted and gnarled around each other. The evolutionist looks at that and says, well, over millions of years, fossils just build up naturally on the earth. How many fossils do you think are forming today? Because what does it take to form a fossil? The carcass or the body of whatever it is that you're fossilizing has to be buried rapidly. So how many fossils are forming today? Almost none. And yet there are millions and millions and millions of fossils buried in the ground. Drive out to the interstate sometime and watch the volume of traffic that goes by in a day. Every time you go to the gas station and pump gasoline or diesel or fuel into your vehicle, every bit of that came from the remains of animals squeezed and compressed under thousands and thousands of feet of sedimentary rock on the world. How do you bury the volume of animals to create that much fuel? I mean, they burn a lot of fuel. They pump it out of the ground around the world by the millions and millions of barrels a day. How do you put that many animals and that many creatures thousands of feet under sedimentary rock in order to make that much fuel? One or two here and there over millions of years? I don't think so. But now, if most of the world in the original creation was a tropical paradise, and again, I wish I could do this all day, I love this. They find fossilized tropical leaves of plants at the poles. The earth had to be vastly different than it is now. In Antarctica, they found fossilized fern leaves and tropical plant leaves. The original creation was made perfect and made to be inhabited by man, and was mostly land. You take a world that is perfect, a world that is designed perfect and that is designed to support an incredible amount of diversity and life, and you fill the world full of animals at the creation and tell your creation to be fruitful and multiply, and then you destroy that entire creation around the entire globe and bury vast chunks of it under sedimentary rock, that explains pretty well where all the fuel comes from. Long, slow processes over millions of years that could barely bury a fossil or two here and there in a small localized flood event. You're going to have to go some to get all the gas that's in the ground. The entire biomass of planet Earth right now, as it stands, meaning every green tree, grass, herb, you name it, if it grows out of the dirt, the entire biomass of the earth right now, if you buried it under the crust of the earth, you could not make as much coal as there is under the crust of the earth right now. And there are coal seams in most countries around the world, and coal is very, very obviously buried vegetation under, again, thousands and thousands of feet of rock and sediment. How did it get down there? And they find many of these polystrata fossils that will run through the coal seams, through a layer of rock, and into the next coal seam, all standing straight up and continuous. And the evolutionist says that those coal seams took millions of years to lay down, and then a layer of sediment was deposited on top, and then another biomass. Really? And that tree stood there the whole time for all that to form? Seems much more likely that all of the vegetation of planet Earth at the time of the flood was completely destroyed by a cataclysmic worldwide flood, sloshed around and then buried in large depressions and valleys under thousands of feet of sediment. That to me makes a whole lot more sense. How do you get fossils all scattered and piled up together like this? Did they all decide to crawl up on top of each other and die one day? Or did God destroy the earth with a flood? Washing hundreds and thousands and thousands. There's places where in just single locations they estimate there to be millions of individual fossils all in a pile. Did all the animals just crawl into the same hole and die every day? Or did God destroy the world in a flood? Willingly ignorant. To be able to look at this and say, long, slow, gradual processes brought this to bear. When you eliminate the most obvious out of the gate, there's nothing left but crazy. I mentioned it last week. But they find petrified clams even as far as on top of Mount Everest. And I mean by the truckload in places around the world. And do you know that most all of the fossilized clams that they find are in that closed position like that? What happens to a clam when it dies? You ever see them at the beach? You don't ever hardly find them in a pair because they open up when they die. The only way to fossilize clams in the closed position is to bury them rapidly in some sort of cataclysmic event. And they find them everywhere on the face of planet Earth. All fossilized, all buried, and you can dig them up by the truckload. Not to mention they find them in the neighborhood of 13 feet across. Speaking to the fact that things used to grow and get a whole lot bigger than they do now. Why? Because the creation was perfect before the flood. I told you we're living in the wrecked, broke down version right now. And it's still beautiful. But it was incredible before the flood. These are pictures of fossilized megalodon and shark teeth. They find these in Kansas. Yeah. Again, a long ways from the beach. Dead middle of the country. They find, and really, these were found in Kansas. They find them in Kansas, Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska, North and South Dakota, Montana.
What about Central Africa?
They find them in Central Africa. They find them in Asia. It's almost as if water used to be nearly everywhere on planet Earth. Fossilized shark teeth, and these were found in Kansas. They were either really good at swimming or
They can breathe out of water.
or they could breathe out of water back then. I don't know. Grand Canyon, and I'm almost done. I got to finish.
That one's just a screensaver.
Look, yeah, it almost looks like one. Do you see that huge canyon? It's miles wide. Miles wide. You see that little bitty river down there? And it's not a tiny river. It's just an enormous canyon. The evolutionist looks at that right there and says, wow, can you believe that little bitty river carved this huge canyon? Yeah, I don't either. But they do. How you going to carve something 10 miles wide with that little bitty ribbon running through the bottom of it? It's not possible. My second question would be, if rivers carve canyons like this over millions of years, then why doesn't every river in the world have a canyon? Why doesn't the Chattahoochee River have a canyon? Why is it only right here that there's a huge Grand Canyon? Not to mention the other fact that they won't tell you is that where the Colorado River starts in Colorado is about 5,000 feet lower than the top rim of Grand Canyon where it flows through now. Meaning that it had to flow uphill for millions of years before it could flow downhill the right way. This is a view from space and it's hard to tell. You're looking from north to south, but that whiter color in the middle right there is the Kaibab Plateau. That's about 5,000 feet higher than the start point. If you could see it on a topographical map, and I couldn't find one that showed it really well, if you were to flood the entire Earth, and then at the end of that flood the water started running off of the world, there would be a huge lake that would form behind that Kaibab Plateau, making a lake basin. And as the water filled that region behind the Kaibab Plateau, eventually that water would overtop what would have been soft sediment at the end of the flood in the Kaibab Plateau. And it would have washed an enormous gash through the landscape when all of that water finally overtopped what was holding it back and was able to get loose. And that's exactly what Grand Canyon looks like. Grand Canyon does not even follow all of the path of the Colorado River. If you look, there's side canyons and side places where it's washed in. It's almost like there was a huge quantity of water that drained off through that basin at one point in time, caused massive erosion. And then now the Colorado River just happens to flow through the crack that was left. That's a whole lot better explanation for what's there. And if you filled Grand Canyon in, and it would take an enormous amount of dirt, if you filled Grand Canyon in, you would make a lake the size of 3 states behind it, an incredible amount of water. And when it filled it up, it would overtop it again, and it would wash it right back out just the same way that it's done already. You have to be willingly ignorant to look at all the evidence, and that's, again, I wish I could have put more together, to look at all the evidence and say, this happened completely by accident, and this happened completely because of natural processes. It doesn't even make logical sense, and it's why Peter said they'll be willingly ignorant. Why do they want to be willingly ignorant? They don't want there to be a God. Because if there's a God, they have to be accountable for it. They have to be accountable to Him, and the last thing that they want is to be accountable to God. And of course, that'll tie in perfectly with Romans chapter 1 this morning. So, all right, I'm done. Thank y'all for being here.